Alrighty, welcome to another episode of Seen on the Small Screen, a podcast dedicated to the overlooked and forgotten movies of television cinema. My name's Becky.
And my name is Jake.
And we are here to simply talk about movies that were made for TV or made for a small screen.
So, yeah, some time has passed.
A little bit of time has passed since we recorded last.
For those of you who have listened to the show up to this point, it's only going to be the difference between uploading the next episode or listening to it on your podcast aggregator of choice. For the rest of us, though, it's been a little longer. Time flows in very weird ways when you are recording a podcast and then when, of course, you're on the other end listening to it. And this episode of the podcast is certainly no exception to that. But yeah, it feels good to be back, feels good to be recording, feels good to be heard, or at least think that you're being heard. In spite of the past time that may seem like past time, or not, depending on your point of view, we have another television offering, obviously, or we wouldn't be doing this recording right now.
Yes, and the offering that we have today is another movie special episode of a TV show that many might be familiar with.
Exactly.
Actually, it's two TV shows.
Yes, it is an amalgamation of two television shows. One original show and then the spin-off that came about halfway through the production of the first. So yeah, speaking of time past, there was actually a sizable chunk of time that happened in between when these two television shows ended and when the episode/movie we're going to be talking about today happened. Basically a little under 10 years.
Yes, both of the series ended in 1978, and then the movie didn't take place until 1987.
And in case you are scratching your head, wondering what the heck we're talking about, we are, of course, going to be reviewing the movie based on the television series The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman.
Yes, the classic from the 1970s for both of those series. And then the movie didn't happen until it was very 1980s.
Oh, very much 1980s, but don't worry, we'll get into that.
We'll touch on that as we're talking about
because this movie is so movie
screamed 1980 something.
Yes, well, 1987 in this particular context. So don't necessarily need to go full Goldbergs on this one. So that's what we have to have for you today. The aptly titled, and this is the full title, mind you. The Return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. A bit of a handful, and seeing it center spaced on a screenplay probably took up anywhere from an eighth to maybe a full quarter of the first page, depending on the size of the font used. So, yeah, who knows? Anyway, it is not for us to speculate.
We're not here to talk about the screenplay. We're here to talk about the movie itself.
Sunday, Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner are back in an all-new Bionic movie.
Looks like fun.
With more incredible powers, they take on international terrorists.
There's been a series of sabotage raids.
Joined by a son with a blinding force.
Just a microchip off the old block.
Sunday, the return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman.
Okay, and then the one last thing I wanted to say before we get started is that, and this is something, I know we're 4 episodes into this podcast, but I just wanted to clarify something, and that is the reviews that we do on this show are going to be completely and utterly filled with spoilers. We're going to go through our movie of choice from beginning to end. Honestly, the only stuff that we're probably going to take out is the boring stuff that doesn't make any sense or doesn't even need to be brought up because it's not even relevant to the plot.
Well, and in all honesty, if you have been listening to this, you know that nothing we are saying is spoiler-free. Every single thing that we are doing is riddled with spoilers.
Exactly. So, again, we have a variety of reasons for wanting to do it this way. Mostly our Biggest reason is, well, honestly, the stuff that we talk about on this show has been long put in the books for a couple of decades, maybe longer. Not all of it, but the vast majority of it is.
Well, and even if it hasn't, like Moontrap Target Earth, even if it hasn't been on the books for a really long time, it's been out long enough that it's okay for us to start talking about spoilers. And if you are wanting to see any one of these and you don't want the spoilers, then you can watch whatever movie it is or video that it is and then come back and listen.
Exactly. For the movie today, I won't tell you exactly where, but you can watch this movie in its entirety online somewhere. So do a Google search. Won't be too tough to find because that's how I was able to come across it. So if you really, really want the spoiler-free experience, best way to do that is watch it yourself. Not that I'm recommending it, because I'll confess, some of these movies are, they're a little tough to get through. Easy to get bored or easy to become utterly disgusted and be like, wow, what a piece of cinematic trash I am seeing.
But the long and the short of it is we're going to be throwing out tons of spoilers. So if you're that afraid that you're not going to be enjoying it because it's full of spoilers, then watch the movie and then listen to what we talk about. Okay, so we always start with the opening credits because it's the logical place to start when you're talking about a movie. So the opening sequence, we have to keep in mind that this is the 1980s, and this is the era of you would start an episode of something with the voiceover of today on blah, and then they would basically tell you 90% of the story in the opening sequence. While that actually didn't happen in that exact same fashion with this, it kind of did, because they were showing clips of the movie you were about to watch during the opening sequence of the movie you were watching.
Yeah, which I thought was kind of an odd choice, but, to each their own, I guess. Like you were saying, though, very much 1980s, because there was not a single real instrument that was used. Basically, the whole soundtrack of this film, nothing but keyboards, or possibly one keyboard.
Everything synthesizer.
Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm a big fan of that type of music. It's actually one of my favorite genres. So if you recall, in the original series, The Bionic Woman, in the introduction, they had these wire CG representations of the human face, and then they'd highlight the Jamie's ear or her legs and say, "Ooh, yes, these are the parts that have the bionic parts in them." And this movie took a similar approach, but I'll confess it was kind of weird, because when they zoomed in on Steve Austin's eye, they went right into the eye socket, and they used that as a transition between that and, I don't know, they'd show an action sequence of some kind. And then they did the same thing with like Jamie's ear as well. They just like zoomed in like into the ear canal, and that was kind of odd as well. And speaking of introductions, might as well get this out of the way. Cool thing about this particular reunion movie is that they were actually able to get all of the original cast back together for it. You had, of course, Lee Majors returning as Colonel Steve Austin. You had Lindsay Wagner returning in her role as Jamie Sommers. You had Richard Anderson, who reprised his role as Oscar Goldman. You had Martin E. Brooks, who came back as Dr. Rudy Wells. So you had Tom Shanley, who played Michael Austin. You might actually be more familiar with him today as opposed to yesterday. He actually has played a few title roles in NCIS, as well as the CBS reboot of the SWAT television series. Up to that point, he mostly starred in bit television shows, He has quite a long filmography, body of work. Then other persons of note, you have Martin Landau, actually, who plays the titular bad guy in the film, Lyle Stenning. What's the best way you can describe Martin Landau? He was kind of, I don't know, what did you...
Wow. Yeah.
Or do we want to wait until we get into the episode?
I'd say let's wait until we get into the episode to talk about him.
Okay, we'll forbear on speaking about Martin Landau, but don't worry, you'll be getting plenty of him. Yeah, you'll be getting plenty of him in the when we actually get into the plot itself. And then last but not least, you have you have Lee Majors II playing a role, and it's like there's no nepotism of any kind going on.
Well, and it was interesting that they chose someone else who looked enough like he could be Lee Majors' son to play Lee Majors' son.
Yeah.
But Lee Majors' actual son, they had him do a kind of a side role.
Yeah, he was an agent for OSI, which is the organization, the good guy organization from the $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman television series. So, all right. Anything else you want to say about the opener? Mm-hmm. So we have our opening done. Yes, we begin our movie with a bit of a voiceover. It's Oscar Goldman. He's talking about an evil rogue organization that has been causing trouble. By trouble, meaning they break into secured facilities that have weapons, like M16s.
And they've been stealing the weapons and amassing them, like stockpiling all of these weapons. To do what? There's not really much description of what exactly they plan to do.
Oh, but they are incredibly happy to have their weapons. Their crates of M16s.
They just don't talk about. So, at least Oscar doesn't talk much about what the ultimate diabolical plan, which kind of deviated a little bit from the series, because at least with the series, they always gave some kind of info to tell what exactly the main plot or the main plan was from whoever the bad guys happen to be.
Exactly. Oscar Goldman even gives them a name. He calls them Fortress. Does it sound intimidating? Well, maybe a little bit, but I guess we'll...
Does it sound familiar from the series? Not so much. I don't ever remember an episode where they mentioned Fortress. I could be totally wrong.
Honestly, Becky, there was really no, single organization. They basically fought like a organization like every single episode.
Yeah, that's what I remember from it. I don't ever remember them mentioning just Fortress as the big bad. They might have mentioned it in one episode here or there. But again, it was like a different organization almost every single episode. Very rare that they would overlap. But the movie, they're talking about it as if we're very familiar with who Fortress is.
Exactly. So, Oscar Goldman is talking about these guys and says that there's only one man who is capable of tracking this organization down and getting to the heart of it and undoing it entirely. Only one man who happens Only one who happens to be a little stronger, better, and faster than the rest.
Better, stronger, faster.
Yep. That man, obviously Steve Austin.
Will be that man.
Yes. Steve Austin, the $6 Million Man.
Who is apparently living out his retirement as a charter boat fisherman. They kind of play it up in the movie like so many other world-weary action heroes of the 1980s. He's just trying to get away. He's just trying to forget it all.
Just trying to give himself a brand new life and reset everything. And so he chooses being a charter fisherman.
Fishing. Yay. So anyway, he and Oscar Goldman, they have a conversation Goldman tries to convince Steve that it's in his best interest to go after the bad guys. Of course, we're way too early in the movie, so Steve just turns him down, saying...
He's still in the I don't want to do it mode.
Oh, yeah.
Because he doesn't have a motive to do it yet.
So Oscar doesn't push the issue, but he does finish the conversation with the ominous warning that the bad guys are watching Steve.
And you learn later on that Oscar orchestrates more to make it so that Steve is going to participate, Steve is going to cooperate and help fight the bad guys again.
On advice from some Navy friends, Steve is rather easily convinced that he needs to go and check up on his son.
Yeah, that is a complete bombshell. There had been no mention of him having a son whatsoever in the series, The $6 Million Man.
Yeah, honestly, it felt a lot like, for those of you who can remember this far back in 2008, Warner Brothers tried to revive their Superman series with the movie Superman Returns. And the big bombshell in that movie was, Superman's got a son. And, yeah... That happened. So
yes.
This was kind of the same thing for me. I was like, wow, Colonel Austin, he's got a son. Okay.
Well, and at first you're thinking, okay, so this must have happened after the series ended, but then you realize, no, that's only like 9 years. There's not a chance he would have a fully grown son who is about ready to graduate from the Air Force Academy.
True. Well, they do explain that in the movie.
They do,
yeah.
But at this point in time, it's a complete out of left field. He suddenly has a son. It was something that happened way before he became the $6 Million Man, way before Jamie Sommers became his fling, anything like that. But it at this point in time, you are just kind of going, oh, okay, he has a son.
So, Steve Austin, he goes to the military academy, and he speaks with a general. And I'm sorry, the general, oh my gosh, every time I saw this guy, I'm sorry, this general looks exactly like Joseph Anthony Flynn III, American character actor, best known for his role as Captain Wallace Binghamton in the 1960s television situation comedy McHale's Navy. He doesn't sound like him. He's dressed up like an Air Force officer, but he's got the thick-rimmed glasses and, even kind of has the same...
The same build, the same facial features.
Just uncanny resemblance. Very, very odd. Yes, Steve Austin manages to set up a daddy date between himself and his son.
Yes. Steve Austin admits that he has never actually met this son because of the whole he was working with OSI thing. Again, that's where they explain part of his existence. Is that he had never actually met this particular son. He had never met his son. Not that he had many. I don't know, he could.
Yeah.
But he had never met his son because of the whole working for OSI and working with Oscar. Wow. Oscar Goldman.
However, once all that is said and done, we slowly pan over to the parking lot, where there are some guys that look like they're up to no good with binoculars, scoping out Mr. Steve Austin.
And we know that they are the bad guys because of the bad guy music.
Yes, not only the bad guy music, but mostly for the fact they happen to be driving around in a very sensible station wagon from the 1980s with the nice wood trim and everything.
The 78 Buick wagons. They're drawing a crowd at your Buick dealer.
Oh yes. Think of the most iconic station wagon you could ever see. And that was the bad guy's car.
That's it.
I mean, at least they get being covert.
Hey, and it seats up to 6 plus.
Seatbelt laws weren't really a thing, so you could always just, sit 3 or 4 people in the back without having seatbelts. Just, They're there, so you could fit as many bad guys in there as you want. In the meantime, Oscar has set up a blind date for one Jamie Sommers.
Crazy. Set up a blind date at a restaurant that just happens to be the same restaurant that Steve Austin is meeting his son.
And the blind date just happens to be with someone who Jamie would never actually fall for.
Because even though this is the first that we've seen of Lindsay Wagner, in the previous scenes, there was a little bit of banter about, or with Oscar Goldman talking to Steve about, Jamie Sommers, you remember her, da-da-da-da, wasn't she grand? Whatever happened to you guys? I thought something was going to happen between you two.
As did every person watching the series.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because, if you remember from the series, they had been romantically involved. They had actually been engaged at the time of Jamie's accident, but Jamie had forgotten about that romance because of the accident. So throughout both of the series, you would see them, you would see crossover episodes a lot, you would see them interact, and you could tell that Steve still had feelings for Jamie, but he completely had to forget many of them.
Yes. When you're the kind of guy who has to have as many romantic entanglements as Steve Austin has had over the years, it's kind of easy to forget. But anyway, so yeah, they just happened to be in the same restaurant because Oscar Goldman was not playing matchmaker. So Jamie decides she's going to quit the blind date that she's on a little early and runs into Steve. And they have a little conversation, and Jamie gets a little bit flustered.
Conversation meaning argument.
Yeah. Steve keeps on having these weird, it's the best way to describe them, almost like stroke flashbacks. Sorry, I classify them as that because they are presented as these weird, glossy overlays of scenes from the original series.
With the slightly blurred out edges so that you know that it's dreamlike and...
Yeah. Well, that's
yeah.
what the intent is, but it just looks strange.
It takes you out of the movie.
Just a little bit. And honestly, they only last for a few moments anyway.
Basically, Jamie keeps getting more and more flustered. Steve is more and more confused. Steve ends up grabbing Jamie's arm, and Jamie ends up throwing him out of the window of this restaurant. Right at the feet of his son.
Fancy that.
Who oddly somehow immediately knew that it was his dad.
Well, he probably saw his dad getting thrown out of multiple windows. Probably a common
Even
place
though
thing.
it was the first time they'd ever met.
Well, the son had kept tabs on Steve. That was mentioned a few times. So I don't know. I'm obviously pulling at straws here. He shows up, and he really, really would like his dad to show up for his graduation. But, Steve, trying to be the good father, decides at that moment to just kind of say, nah, I got other stuff going on. He basically plays up being the deadbeat dad. And the son doesn't like that at all. So he kind of walks off in a huff.
And he tells him off for leaving him living with his aunt while Steve was going and working with OSI. So again, you get a little bit more of the backstory. But that's about it. That's really all that scene was worth, was trying to get some of the backstory for Steve and his son.
Yeah,
some of it. And they still even give a little bit more details later on.
Meanwhile, Steve Austin is being stalked by a group of shady people in a very sensible station wagon.
And we learn that their goal is to steal and copy Steve Austin's bionic coding.
Yes.
The bionic materials, the bionic coding. They want to copy all of it.
They want their own army of bionic warriors. All of them.
Giggle,
giggle.
To eventually overtake all of America.
Yes, we're not actually...
Question mark?
Yeah, they actually don't say what their overarching goals are. It's to create some kind of revolution or something, but it's never really explained. Anyhow, they decide that they're going to make their move, so they start chasing Steve Austin in not just in a car this time. Steve's out driving around at this point.
Steve's in just his car, but they're chasing him in their station wagon.
Yes. Steve manages to get away by jumping over a truck that has a boat in it. And in true stunt car fashion, when that sucker hits the ground, it goes kersplot. Another car axle bites the dust for the movie industry. But in the next scene, the car just drives away, and so
because that's what the movies do.
Everything's good. Everything's great.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, after the chase, Steve decides he's going to go to OSI and get to the bottom of things. So he has a very brief talk with his secretary, who gives, in my opinion, I think it's one of the only real funny lines from the movie.
She is eyeing Steve up and down as he's waiting to be escorted in to visit with Oscar. And she thinks to herself,
I wonder what parts are bionic.
Then he goes in with Oscar, and I'll confess, they don't really talk about a whole lot. In fact, one of the irksome things in this movie was they kept on trying to refer to the fact that, Oscar, anyway, in this conversation, lets it be known to Steve that apparently Jamie Sommers actually remembered the relationship they had before her accident. And so Oscar was trying to say, actually, there
was another explosion.
She eventually was able to remember what happened before. But the weird thing is that when that happened, Steve had another weird flashback. And they actually went to the point in the original series where it's blatantly obvious that Jamie does remember about all that stuff, because she even remembers, or she even says, I know what was between us before my accident. But in this movie, they tried to make it sound like it was a revelation of sorts. So kind of odd. But then the weird thing is that will not be the first time they bring it up. They actually bring it up quite a number of other times as well.
They keep trying to convince us that Jamie had completely forgotten anything that they had whatsoever. When she was talking to Steve at the restaurant and getting mad at him, it wasn't making sense to him, because in his brain, she had completely forgotten about any feelings that they had had for each other.
In case you're picking up on a theme here, this movie is almost exclusively about places that Colonel Steve Austin goes to, because it's like in the very next scene you have him going and visiting the laboratory of his good friend Dr. Rudy Wells, who is in the process of, no foreshadowing here intended, working on some new and improved bionics. He's working on a pair of legs that would enable the user to run even faster than Jamie or Steve ever could.
So long as the legs don't snap off in the process because they're running too fast.
And then, and this is probably my favorite one of all, is he was working on a new and improved bionic eye that would enable a person to shoot laser beams out of their eyes. I wish I were making that up. I am not.
Nope.
It
totally
happened.
100% true for this movie. He was working on a laser beam eye.
Shooting freaking laser beams out of his eye. Very convenient, all that, because again, Steve goes and visits Jamie and gets there just in time to see that she has been kidnapped by the bad guys in the sensible station wagon, yes. And so he gives chase, on foot this time, not in a car.
Ladies, this is why we say don't get in cars with strange men.
Well, yes.
She was forced to, but...
At gunpoint, because they threatened to shoot the blind school children that Jamie worked with as a therapist.
If you remember, that is a complete divergence from the Bionic Woman series as well, because she was not a therapist. She was a teacher. And not only that, she was a teacher of, I would say, wasn't it like junior high?
It was a combination
Or
of
like high
elementary
school?
and junior high school
Yeah.
students. It was like grades 1 through 8.
Yeah, that it changed from year to year, but that's an okay thing because that does happen. But she wasn't a therapist; she was a teacher. Which, I mean, yes, you could make the argument that a teacher has some of the training that a therapist does, but not a clinical therapist, which is what Jamie was. But we never know. There had been 9 years between, so she could have had a complete change of career.
Yeah, I mean, she is the Bionic Woman, after all. The veritable icon of feminism at its best, in my opinion. That, a woman can and does have the ability to go out in the world and not only change it, but make a difference. Anyway, so back to the text. So yes, Steve takes chase, and for the first time in this movie, at this point, we're a good half hour to 45 minutes in, as we finally get a glimpse of bionics in action. And I have to admit, I was a little surprised at some of the stuff that Steve was able to do.
Again, it comes down to kind of a continuity thing between the series and the movie. There's a slight disconnect because Steve is able to jump from just a standing jump onto a 3-story building, onto the roof of a 3-story building.
And why is this odd, you say? Well, in the television series, Steve Austin, among many other abilities that he was able to perform, was in fact able to perform leaps of certain heights. As far as I can recall, it was mostly just like tall fences and...
Or up to the rafters of a building or something
Yeah.
like that. Now, we could be wrong, and he could have jumped up to the top of a 3rd-story building at some point in time in the series, but we don't remember him being able to jump that high.
Now, he was able to jump down from pretty tall heights. He would actually do that like all the time. But when it came to jumping up, I want to say that once I saw him jump from the ground to the top of, I think it was like a 1.5, 2-story Rambler style house. Mm-hmm. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, that was the full extent. And
now, again, we're not saying that it wasn't possible. We're saying we never saw it in the original series.
Exactly. I mean, it's easy to assume in this case that maybe he got upgrades of some kind that allowed him to do just a little bit more than he was able to accomplish in the original television series. We don't know. But at the same time, they never really bothered to explain it. So kind of left to our own devices. So he jumps up onto a building, jumps down from a building. Not only jumps down from a building, he jumps right onto the roof of the escaping station wagon, allowing just enough confusion for Jamie to make good her escape.
She is able to kick out the door and jump out of the vehicle just in time for Steve to then roll off the side of the car, reach down and flip over the car. And it's not just flip over the car. He actually flips the car top over bottom, sideways, one full revolution. So the car does a 360.
Which again is something where he was able to lift cars.
We don't remember seeing that in
push cars.
Yeah, we don't ever remember seeing that in the series. Again, we're not saying, hey, it wasn't possible in the series. We're saying we don't remember seeing it in the series. But this then allows he and Jamie to make amends, to get over their differences pretty quickly, actually, and sit down and have a pleasant conversation with each other, talking about what is going on, what is happening at the same restaurant that they happen to have destroyed just the other night. Well, okay, didn't destroy, but, that Jamie happened to throw Steve out of the window of just the other night.
Yeah, and the management of the restaurant were just fine with having them come back, in spite of the scene that they made the night before. And while that's going on, Steve's son is at a bar. For lack of any better terms, when you're in a bar in a movie, you just expect that there's going to be a fight. And hey, lo and behold, that actually happens.
Yep, it turns into a fight, and then Steve shows up just in time to give a bionic flair to the fight. And all of these bionics, I will give credit to the movie, all of these bionics were also followed by the same sound effects that they would be accompanied by during the series.
Yes, they were. Oh, also we should mention that in the process of said bar fight, Steve's son gets thrown through a window.
Yes.
Like his dad.
Like father, like son.
The only thing I'll say about this scene is I thought it was kind of interesting that while this is going on, the music, and I wish I was making this up, the music that they were playing in the background was It's Hip to Be Square.
But it wasn't the original song. It was a remixed version of It's Hip to Be Square.
Yeah, at least it kind of sounded like it. But anyway.
It was a remixed version of It's Hip to Be Square. It was not Huey Lewis in the News.
We're the next day. We're at Steve Jr.'s graduation ceremony. And I guess the part of the graduation ceremony is him going up in an airplane.
Now, when we say Steve Jr., we do eventually learn that his name is Michael. Oddly, it didn't happen that we learned his name right away. He was always just Steve's son, so hence calling him Steve Jr.
Yeah, Steve Jr., sure,
But
that's fine.
We can call him Michael.
Michael. So, Michael goes up in an airplane, and absolutely nothing goes wrong.
Wrong.
Yeah.
Nope. Quite the opposite of that. Quite a few things go wrong. His plane crashes. He was not able to eject in time to avoid all of the crash. And we learned that Michael is injured quite severely. He shouldn't even be alive, given all of his injuries. But Oscar has now flown in, or driven in, or brought in somehow, one Dr. Rudy Wells to try to
Save
Steve's son. In the meantime, Steve did not know about the fact that Oscar was bringing in Dr. Wells, so he went to try to make a bargain with Oscar, saying that he'd be willing to help him fight the bad guys if he could get Dr. Wells to save his son. Little did he know that Oscar had already arranged it. But then Steve had given his word, so he had to help. Well, and we learned that in the same path as Jamie and his father, after they received their bionics, they both were very unhappy that they received the bionics, and that is the exact same thing that we see with Michael, and he is very unhappy that he has received any of these bionics.
Yeah, it's almost like when Dr. Wells surgically implants the bionics, he must intentionally also program an extreme amount of mopiness with them, because every single time it's like, oh, why do I have to be different?
It's the woe is me factor. Now, I get that there's going to be some kind of depression after this kind of traumatic event. There is going to be. That's a very natural thing. But it's like the depression for each of the three of them followed the exact same pattern. And including the fact that when finally convinced of the value of their bionics, you got to see a training montage.
Yes, Jamie Sommers takes it upon herself to become Michael's personal therapist. And after a really unimpressive conversation that goes nowhere, they suddenly break to a training montage, because training montages make everything all right.
Because she convinced him that the training montage would actually save him. So, I don't know about you, but I think the training montage would actually make things a lot easier sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
I think just a training montage could solve a lot of the world's problems.
I'm pretty sure the world would be a better place.
Yeah.
It certainly helped Michael, because by the end of it, at the start of it, he was sad and mopey and I can't do this. And then by the end, he was running on a treadmill, at least according to the readout, running on a treadmill in excess of nearly 200 miles an hour. And
the treadmill was totally fine with this particular speed, by the way.
Yes, and why his shoes weren't melting, or at least smoking at this point is, who knows, maybe he was wearing specials.
Maybe they were asbestos lined.
Or maybe it was just the 80s and people just didn't care about it. Who knows?
Yeah.
We haven't really talked much about Martin Landau in this movie. He plays the main bad guy. So he's been kind of in the background. He was in prison, but then off camera he escapes.
And somehow while he was in prison, Steve got in to talk to him face to face.
Oh yeah, Steve just appears out of nowhere in a maximum security facility. Don't ask us how he
manages to have a face-to-face conversation in the exact same room. There is no plexiglass. There is no talking to him on the phone. It's not even looking like he's talking to him through jail cell bars. He is talking to him in the exact same room.
So, Martin Landau hatches an evil scheme wherein he first kidnaps Dr. Rudy Wells. He kidnaps a blind teacher from the school or hospital facility, they never explain which, that Jamie works at. And they kidnap Michael, the bionic boy, as well. And takes them to his fiendishly awesome fortress.
There was a glass blowing factory?
A glass factory, yes. Hey, you know what? If I'm going to take over the world... it wouldn't be a glass factory. That just
and we have to bring up the idea that Jamie had previously talked to the bionic boy in their conversations, in their therapy sessions, had previously talked to the bionic boy about potential ways to overcome the bad guys when they would lock you into a room by yourself. And for the bionic boy, the trick was that he would build a motorcycle in his head.
Which he does. But the bad guys all think that he's gone crazy.
Yes, because anytime they try to get information out of him, he keeps talking about his motorcycle and refuses to give them any information until they decide that they are going to kill him. But what is there left but for Steve Austin and Jamie and Oscar Goldman and some of Steve's naval friends? They all mount a daring rescue. A daring rescue that is, by the way, a by-the-numbers storm the castle scene from an 80s action film.
Yep, basically every single cliche that you can associate with taking out a evil organization and completely overrunning it within the space of a few minutes, this movie does in spades. Steve Austin arrives on scene. He knocks out a few guards. He makes sure to bend the barrels on any N16 that he comes across because, well, he can, and that's his thing. And then he goes about in solid Snake style and starts setting up bombs all over the place, and nobody even knows he's there.
Yes. Okay, so let's storm the castle, right? So you have the plan, right? The plan includes a distraction. So there's a diversion in there somewhere. And then it includes planting the explosives, right? It includes, you see the communication while they're planting the explosives. So the communication, the coordination with the others in the team. Then you see the explosions start to take place. You see people running around, like you see Jamie running around trying to figure out which direction she's supposed to go, which oddly she knows exactly where she's going, even though she's never been into this facility before. And you even see Jamie throw herself through a window.
Yes, completing the triumvirate of bionic people being thrown through windows in this movie. It happens 3 times, and each time it happened to a character who either did have, or at some point would have, bionic replacements. So, I don't know what point they were trying to go for there, but honestly, this movie already had enough weird messianic vibes anyway. I mean, it's a lot of weird, like, Superman Jor-El talk. Very strange.
Yes. And along the way, you get lots and lots of fist fights, which you have to have.
Lots of guns blazing.
And people with fists beating people with guns.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, yes, because bionic fists will beat semi-automatic or fully automatic weaponry any day of the week.
Unfortunately, the only funny, quote-unquote funny, quips that you get, that you would normally get in an 80s action film during this fight, are basically Steve trying to say that, oh, he can't do some of the things that Michael can do. Like the laser vision.
Which he uses to shoot the gun out of Martin Landau's hand. That's enough to incapacitate him as well, because he just kind of falls. He's in a doorway. He gets shot, and he kind of rolls to the right. That's the last you see of him for the rest of the movie. So
yeah, that was like the easiest boss battle ever.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just shoot him with your laser eye once.
Before Michael had arrived on the scene, Steve was there, and they were having the old peacocks. My tail feathers are brighter and grander than your tail feathers kind of speech. And yeah, you knew that Steve was going to wipe the walls with them eventually, but for some reason the son had to come in, and the rest is history. So yeah, explosions go off. The organization just kind of like falls to pieces. I mean, apparently that's all you really needed to like really rattle their cages, was just to set some timed explosives in key locations.
And then you get one person with laser vision.
Yeah, and then just blow them up one by one. Bad guys, they went down pretty quickly, either by being killed or surrendering. Like
I said, easiest boss battle ever.
Yeah, so it's like, so you have to think to yourself, Oscar Goldman, if this organization Fortress was as big and as
nefarious,
as you're making it seem to be, why did they go down so quickly? It was almost like, I don't know, maybe we were getting to the end of the
time slot, so they had to just say, okay, this happens, the bad guys just give up.
But fortunately, they did have at least enough time to have one final victory party at, yep, you guessed it, it's the exact same restaurant that they've been eating at the whole time. Presumably somewhere in Southern California, not Washington, D.C., like the original series had them at.
And we only say they're in Southern California because at various times in OSI, they're referring to maps and pointing to maps and talking about the area, and the maps are showing the American Southwest.
Yep. So, I don't know. Can take that for what it's worth. Anyway, there's a big, huge victory party.
Oscar tries to convince both Steve and Jamie that they should come back and work for him. Both of them refuse because they want to go off and live happily ever after together.
Yep, they tell Oscar to drop dead for the time being. And they wander off into the sunset,
leaving the Bionic Boy to work for Oscar as he pleases.
Yes, in case you haven't figured it out, everyone, this movie was yet another attempt by Universal to try and reboot. Believe it or not, reboots were a thing back in the 1980s. Didn't happen quite as often as we have today, but they did happen every once in a while. This would have been a hard reboot for the series, with the Bionic Boy, Michael Austin, as the titular bionic person in this context. And I imagine that had the series gone forward, it probably would have had Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner showing up at various times.
They probably would have made a lot of cameos. Okay, so that leads to the question of, in the intro, instead of simply describing the Bionic Boy as better, stronger, faster, would they have then, because of the upgraded bionics, would they have said he was better, stronger, faster, or would they have said he was more better, more stronger, more faster? We will never know.
We will not, sadly, because the movie did not actually reboot the Bionic franchise. Instead, what you got were more made-for-TV movies that happened roughly about every 3 to 4 years apart. So,
and we'll talk about those in their own episodes.
I imagine that at some point we will be doing episode treatments of both those movies. But for now, we have reached the end of the return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman.
Yes.
So, thoughts, impressions, really quick.
Biggest thought is continuity was not super high on their priority list.
It was not.
There were a lot of points where it was just like, okay, I can sort of see where you're saying that, but it doesn't really fit with what you had said before. So, or it also just assumed that you would have known certain things from the series. My guess is that they were thinking, it's been 9 years. People aren't going to remember some of these details, and they're not important to the storyline.
Yes, never taking into account that maybe at some point in the not too distant future, we would have possession of a technology called a DVD or digital entertainment device that would allow us to watch a television series from the beginning to the end.
So that was my first impression. The second impression was a lot of the actors needed a paycheck. I'm not going to deny them their willingness to work and their willingness to try to get that paycheck. But, yeah. And then the last impression was very much the transition had been made from 1970-something, 1978, to 1987.
Oh, yeah. There were quite a lot of things that we didn't mention in the movie that were just like, 1980s. Like, for example, Lindsay Wagner was sporting a feather hairdo in the style of Princess Diana. So, yeah. And then, of course, Steve Austin, he had hair that basically, it looked like he just walked off the set of The Fall Guy and just walked onto the movie set in this film because he had the exact same.
He very well might have.
Yeah, that weird curly afro, almost an afro, and almost,
but not quite.
Yeah,
almost looked like a perm.
Yeah,
but not quite.
The only thing that I will add on to that is, honestly, I thought as I was watching this, I thought this movie had a lot of unexplored potential, to be perfectly honest. Yes, the whole Steve Austin has a son, the son gets bionic abilities. That was a little contrived, and I'll confess it kind of lost me a little bit. I personally, though, would have been fine if it had followed that same format. Just don't have the son character basically do everything that happened to the parent, because it was like he was involved in a plane crash, and he just happened to lose one of his arms, both of his legs, and most of his
one of his eyes.
Yeah, and one of his eyes. It was just like, wow, like the unbelievability that this movie demanded of you sometimes was a little difficult to take in.
It was blow for blow, the exact same thing that had happened to Colonel Steve Austin. You can make the argument that that was sort of what happened when they made the Bionic Woman, and the Bionic Woman was actually pretty successful. But the reason why that worked was because they didn't do everything the exact same. Yes, her legs, and it was one of her arms. But she had the hearing, and they were able to take her and make her unique, in a sense. Even though, basically, the biggest difference was she was a woman and he was a man.
You don't have to change the entire formula to make a sequel or an addition to, like, your original source material work. But you do need to have some kind of change or changes. And those changes have to be different enough so that people will still stay engaged with the story. And Becky, as you mentioned, they did that perfectly with the Bionic Woman. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think they could have done it here, but instead they decided to play it very safe, very by the numbers. And sadly, I think it was that call to caution that, the studios pretty much kind of glossed over this and were just like, nah, we don't need another rendition of this series. It's all been done before, because that was kind of what they did.
Well, and you could even see the writing on the wall. If they're going to make Steve Austin's son the exact same, like, he gets all of the exact same abilities except for his eye now shoots lasers and he can run faster. Those are the differences. You make everything else about him the same. What makes you think that, you know, what would make a viewer think that they're not going to have him do some of the exact same kinds of things that his father, the original $6 Million Man, had done?
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, the only distinction they made was, well, he could shoot laser beams out of his eye and he could run faster.
But that wasn't enough of a difference to really make a difference. I mean,
you got to change up the origin story. I'm sorry. That's kind of what it boils down to. And God, I don't know, give him a reason to actually want to use the bionics instead of just doing the whole training montage. And now he likes it. Hey, Mikey likes it. Because,
He likes it. Hey, Mikey.
Alrighty, so I think we've set our piece on this particular episode, so I think it's probably about time we wrapped it up.
Yeah, about time to sign out, and we hope that you have enjoyed listening to us muse on the wackiness / fun, albeit repetitiveness, of the return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman.
Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will catch you next time. We'll see you around.
See ya.